Welcome to r/MaliciousCompliance, where we share stories of people conforming to the letter, but not the spirit of a request. Thank you, friends, for subscribing to the channel, and for so many likes. The first story. Our program coordinator was demoted and asked to go back to instructing after the discipline process. The second story. New company fired me and didn't want to give me a commission check, but they didn't know I had the information they needed. On to the first story. I really want to help you not get kicked out of the program I just tried to get you kicked out of. This all happened about 8 years ago. I was a firefighter going through a paramedic program, which was sponsored and more or less run by my fire department. Our program coordinator, PC, was a salty veteran of the department, who also happened to be a salty Marine vet as well, as she would often remind us. Our class was her first opportunity to step up as PC, after having been an instructor for the program for years, and she was going to make sure that we didn't embarrass her or make her look bad. Turns out, she didn't need much help with that. For some perspective, paramedic courses are typically a 2-year associate's degree, with plenty of time and separation between coursework, labs, and in-field clinical experience. Our program was accelerated, with a total time of 6 months, including classes, labs, clinicals, and field time, start to finish. Needless to say, the stress associated with successfully completing the program was already through the roof, before accounting for any friction from instructors or PCs. To relieve the stress, we set up what we affectionately referred to as our hobo camp in the back parking lot of the program building. It was not part of the main college campus. This included my broken down VW Westie, which stored a few chairs, a coffee table, and a few tarps we would string together off the side of the VW for shade. The 21 of us in my program took every opportunity to be outside in the parking lot, instead of in the classroom, and got good at playing horse on a balance board, pulling jesters in stalls with a hacky sack, holding jam sessions on a few guitars, and all around kicking back and trying to forget where we were, in 10-minute increments during class breaks. 2 of the ringleaders of our hobo group, brothers, happened to be 2 of the JHs mentioned below. They are both awesome guys, real good people, but due to their default and automatic attitudes of malicious compliance, they quickly became thorns in the side of the program's administration and the anti-heroes of our class. Over the course of the 6 months our program ran, our class had a number of encounters with our former drill sergeant program coordinator and the inane rules she would set for our class, above and beyond what the program itself dictated. Our first dust-up with our PC was over an attendance form. Every morning we had to mark our initials next to our names. Simple enough, although we did have 3 classmates with the same initials, JH. After a couple of weeks, one of the JHs began circling his initials, not one of the brothers mentioned above, just to make it stand out from the other 2. Wanting to help him along in his endeavors, a few of us started adding circles, then stars, and then explosions, unicorns, and campaign slogans, touting JH for President of the Universe. It was a good way to start the day, as we all like to see what had been added from the day before. This went out for about 2 weeks, when our PC stormed into the room at the beginning of class one day. She whipped out the attendance form and spent about an hour lecturing us on our lack of professionalism and about how embarrassed she was to have to submit this form to the state, with all the doodles all over it. She then lamented the waste of time that was occurring for the entire class, all because somebody decided to be unprofessional, and then had us all reinitial our names on a fresh form, which took all of 5 minutes without the lecture. This was the first time we had heard anything about it being considered an official document, but even so we would have understood, and been more than happy to just get a new sheet re-signed. No lecture necessary. With that completed and still on the warpath, our PC then announced that anyone who had contributed to the anarchy displayed on the form would need to get up immediately and follow her into her office. She then marched out. Well, almost half the class had added one thing or another, so we all stood up and followed her into her little closet of an office, having to huddle in so we could all fit. She was visibly surprised that most of us were in there. We highly suspect she had anticipated that the 2 JH brothers, and maybe 1 to 2 others, would have been all that she nabbed in her enforcement operation, but went ahead with her course of action for all offending parties involved. She had written up a discipline form for the incident, and had to make copies for everyone in the room, but graciously said that after we had each signed our own copy, she would simply put it in our student records, and it would not be forwarded to the college dean over our particular program, or to our fire department chief, unless we violated any program rules, or the personal code of conduct she had implemented in place of actually following the program rules. She also noted that even though she wasn't forwarding it through the typical channels, this would serve as a first violation of our student agreement, and any other infractions would be considered a second violation. We would be subject to a disciplinary hearing, and possible expulsion from the program. We all realized that this would look ridiculous on the desk of the dean, or our chief anyway, so gladly accepted the terms of the agreement, and went on about our business. Time passed, and while we didn't actively try to antagonize our PC or any other instructors, we honestly didn't have any time or energy for it with the heavy course load we were trying to keep up with. Our PC had set an obvious tone for the remainder of the course. There were multiple small dust-ups over all sorts of things, from what we had to wear in class. Every class before us was allowed to wear civvies in class and be comfortable, but we had to wear Class B uniforms the entire program. To the hobo camp in the parking lot. It turns out the parking lot was privately owned, and that the management company didn't have a single issue with what we were doing, since the parking we used was essentially on the backside of an alley, and not visible to the public whatsoever, and not used for any other businesses or buildings, to writing things on the whiteboard in our classrooms. The whiteboard issue is what led to my final showdown with our PC. The policy of not writing on the whiteboards was one that was only told to one of our breakout groups. Our class would break into 4 smaller groups on certain days, and rotate through instructors to allow us more one-on-one time, to practice skills such as IV starts or ET intubations. The group mentioned above had done one thing or another to annoy that particular instructor, and he had mentioned it to our PC that he had asked them, specifically them, the one group, to refrain from writing on the whiteboards. That particular day, a Friday, my group had finished our rotation in the main classroom, and an excellent discussion with our current instructor had jogged my memory about an interesting quote, which I then decided to write on the top corner of the front whiteboard so others could read and enjoy it. We joined back up as a class at the end of that day, and one of our instructors sent us home for the weekend. The showdown began the following Monday. We were all sitting in class waiting for the day to start, when our PC stormed into the classroom and demanded that whoever wrote that quote on the whiteboard follow her immediately. Well, knowing for some reason or another I had peeved off the mega beast, I got up and followed her out and into her office. She saw that it was me, and expressed surprise that I would have been the one to have done that. She as much as said she had expected one of the JH brothers to have been the culprit, but that regardless, she had already initiated the discipline process. She told me that it was such a serious issue because over the weekend, the dean of the program, as well as a few other administrative types had come for a tour of the facilities and an update on the progress of changes the program was currently making. She had brought them into the classroom as part of the tour and had noticed the quote up on the board. She never hinted as to whether the dean or admin staff had reacted in any way to, or even seen the quote, but the fact that it was up there was embarrassing enough for her as the PC. Along with the fact that the class was told not to write things on the board, she had no choice but to write up a disciplinary form, and since I had a previous infraction on my record, she would obviously have to hold a disciplinary hearing, and reminded me that I might be expelled from the program. She sent me back to class, but pulled me out a few more times throughout the day, to first ask me why I had written that quote. I told her I thought the quote was fitting for a conversation my group had just had with our instructor, and why I had written on the board at all. At this point, I was done with the insanity, and really didn't care if I got the boot or not, but I told her that this was the first time I had heard that I wasn't supposed to write on the board. She continued with the process, and conferred with the instructor who had asked their group to not write on the board. The instructor said they had told the entire class, not just an individual group. With the instructor having told the PC that, I went along with it, and just told her that if they had told all of us that, I simply hadn't heard it, but understood that it was a rule whether it was posted or written anywhere or not, which it wasn't. The discipline process carried on for about 2 weeks, with the PC initially reminding me frequently that I might be getting kicked out of the program. Eventually, I think she started getting some pushback from her supervisors and our chief, as booting me this far into the program would be a huge waste of department resources. We got paid to attend class, and the department paid to cover our shifts while in class, so we didn't have to work on shift while attending the program. I was still focusing on class, but it all but checked out as far as the discipline process was concerned. I couldn't see how or why she was so upset, but if she wanted me out, then I'd be happy to be out. I did notice that by the end of the 2 weeks, the PC's tone had changed dramatically. Initially, she had all but called for my head, but that changed first to, "We'll see what we can do to give you another chance," to, "I'm working really hard to keep you here." I think it started changing when the dean and fire chief finally got their hands on the PC's discipline reports, first for making some doodles on an attendance sheet, and then for writing a quote on a board. She evidently hadn't made a note as to what the quote was, and finally asked me if I might remember it, and if I could possibly write it down and explain why I thought it was a good idea to write it on the board, even after I had a first rules violation on the books, and must have known that writing on the whiteboard was a violation that could get me expelled from the program. I remember the quote all right, and was happy to provide it as well as an explanation. The quote, "We used to think we knew, but now we must confess, the more we know, the less." Essentially, my instructor had been talking about how even as a salty medic of 20 years, they were still having to learn new things and reevaluate their skills and knowledge. I thought that quote was quite fitting. I basically explained it to my PC in writing, as saying that even though we think we know everything, we still have a lot to learn. To this day, I honestly think she had taken the quote as an insult to either herself or the program. If only she had known what she had known she'd known. After my explanation had reached the dean and the chief, the disciplinary process was magically concluded, and both incidents were removed from my record. I would have to confirm, but I believe that my class was the only one our program coordinator was allowed to run, and she was demoted and asked to go back to instructing after that. Some of the best memories and friendships I made were in the hobo camp, and to this day, I know the less. The next story is, buy out our company and then fire everyone before you change the system? Huh? Works for me. I had worked at a small-end rural internet company for nearly 6 years. It was family-owned, and they paid us all really well for the work that we did. Barely anyone ever left the company. In my position, I was head of sales, and I controlled all software that was associated to clients. This had everything in it, including billing addresses, service addresses, and leads for new clients. It was an outdated program for sure, but it got the job done, and it worked for us. Fast forward time, and we're still doing our regular jobs, when there was an unscheduled meeting thrown at us. We walked in, and there were several new faces sitting on the other end of the table. They announced that they had sold the company to XYZ. XYZ seemed like an okay place to continue working, because they too were local, and the team seemed nice. I was told everything is business as usual, and not to do anything different. The transition took place, and every so often, someone from the new company would come to me and ask me how we would do things and get a feel for it. I could tell they were trying to weed us out, so I went balls to the wall with renewals on old accounts. They announced to me that I needed to go to the HR department around closing time. Having anticipated this, I saved all of my commission files and emailed them to myself. I went to the office, and they laid me off on the spot because they do not pay commission to their staff. I said okay, and that I plan on them still paying me commission for the time I was there, as they had not discussed anything pay-related with me yet. She said again, we do not pay commission. I emailed my commission statement to the manager I was working with, and basically was told the same thing. Fast forward to the next week, when they realized they no longer had the credentials to get into our systems, and they called to ask for the information. I let them know that I would be happy to do that when I come up there to get my check for my commission. I did not hear anything the next day, and then I get a call that my commission check is in the office. I went up there, grabbed the biggest commission check I'd ever made, and gave them the credentials. Never tell someone business as usual when you do not intend on things being business as usual. Subscribe, hit the like button, and have a nice day.